Welcome back. I am glad to have you back, and I'm glad that you have been able to follow so far. So far, we were able to set up a Node Express server, and we were able to create a couple very elementary gets to understand how that works. And then we did our first real CRUD operation by making a post of a channel, and we attached the information that we wanted to put up into a JSON object that we created either in Insomnia or in Postman, and we were able to attach that JSON object to the rec.body. We pulled it off of the rec.body, and we were able to use it to we auto generated an ID, and then we were able to push that up. So let's do a little bit more robust get, so we did post to this channel. After we've posted a couple channels, let's write an endpoint that allows us to get these channels back. And in order to do that, we are going to simply use server.get again. And this time it's to this very same URL pattern. The URL pattern, there's no conflict here because in this endpoint we're doing a post, and in this endpoint we're doing a get. This says, hey, send information to this URL, and we did that. This says, hey, what's at this channel? Let's get this information. So let's, as always, we have to include the homies. They always go together. That's what we call them, the homies. And this is pretty easy. This is we're going to do just similar to what we kind of did up here. We're going to do a res dot status. We're going to return a status, and then we're going to add a message. So we're just going to do res dot status of 200, which means successful, and then we'll chain onto it a JSON of all the channels right here. And that's a basic get. In a real RESTful Express server, we wouldn't be going after a simple array. Like I've said many, many times, we would go after a backend database, and the code here will get a couple more lines of code. But later on in the video series, we're going to learn all how to set up a SQLite backend database, and how to make posts and deletes and updates, etc., and where the data will persist. Right now, every time we make a post and then make change to our code base, this array gets wiped out. We have to input our information again. So so that is how we do a basic get. We're going to save this. Because we changed our code base, any information that we entered into these arrays got wiped out. So let's go to Insomnia or Postman. Let me see which one I have open. I think I have Postman open ready to go. Let's do a post and use our, let's use our post endpoint we wrote in the last video to input some information, and then let's go ahead and pull back out and then use our get endpoint. And so we're going to enter a couple, maybe three. We'll just say we have a channel called node beginning. The lesson ID that's in there is that, and we'll hit send. Boom. And let's do a node intermediate. And we'll say the lesson ID, there's 2. These are all, this is the code we wrote in the last video. And we'll just say node advanced 3. Send. Great. We should have 3 channels in there now. So we literally just wrote our get endpoint here. Let's test it out. So it's to API channels and it's a get. So let's, we have localhost API channels. In Postman, you can click the plus to get a new one. I get all these ones up here. And then you want to make sure it's a get. So make sure it's a get, and there's no rec.body business. There's none of that stuff you got to do. It's just a get to that channel right there and hit send, and boom, we get the 3 we just entered. That is how you write a simple get endpoint against the post data. Well, that was pretty easy. So next, let's figure out how to do a delete. Well, actually, you know what's good right now is we wrote a post endpoint for channels and then a get for channels. Why don't you pause the video and try to write a post endpoint for lessons and then a get endpoint for lessons. Remember that a lesson, so in our post for channels, we had to include these 3 things. But in a post for a lesson, see, we had included these 3 things in a post for a channel. We wrote that. In a post for a lesson, we really only need to have these 2 things. And so try to write a post for a lesson and create your JSON object and do similar to what you have here, what you see here in the post, and then do a channel.push into lessons, do a lessons.push, and then return a status code. And then once you've tested that, then, and you get the right response back in Postman or Insomnia, then write your get endpoint. So go ahead and pause the video now and work on that. And I'm going to wait a couple seconds. And then after that, we're going to work on our delete endpoint. Okay, I'm assuming that you were able to successfully create a post to create lessons, and you were able to write an endpoint to be able to get the lessons. Now we're going to create our delete endpoint. We've inputted some information, and now we want to delete. Let's say we want to delete. Let's say we want to delete one of these. When we do a get, let's say we want to delete one of them and just end up with 2. Let's say one of them is wrong. And so we have to figure out how to write a delete endpoint. And the cool thing about Express is it's so intuitive, is we just basically, well, you know what? Before we do that, let's write the server.post to the lessons real quick together. Let's write that together. Server.post API lessons. It's /API. Let's just write these out real quick before we get to the delete. Rec res. And then we're going to say const lesson info equals rec.body. And then let's say lesson info.id equals short id lowercase I, short id.generate, and then lessons.push lesson info, and then we have to return a response. We always have to return a response, or your application will hang. It'll just continue to churn away. So you have to return a response one way or another. So response.status of 201 and return JSON object of lesson info. And so your lesson should look like that. And let's write the get for that real quick. Server.get /API/lessons, and the homies rec res, and we're just going to say res.status 200 for successful JSON lessons. There we go. And I won't bother testing them in Postman right now. This will work. It'll be fine. In a real real database, we wouldn't really have to enter this generate ID because the ID of the lessons would be automatically linked to the same lesson ID number that's in the channels. And they sort of stay bound together. Here we're sort of manually forcing the lessons in the channels, and so it's a little artificial the way we're doing it. But this is absolutely adequate for what we're trying to do, is figure out how to mechanically construct a post and a get. All right, so now let's work on a delete. We have input some channels. Let's delete one of them. So how do we do that? We learned that when we want to make a post, we can attach the information that we want to post to this rec object. And we learned that within the rec object, there's another object called the body. And in this body, we could create a JSON where we put information in Postman or Insomnia, and that is the information that we want to send up, the rec.body. Well, there is another way of passing information up that's doesn't use the rec.body, and it's using a URL parameter, and we refer to it as rec.params. And how that works is, let's just create a new endpoint down here. A delete is server.delete, very intuitive, /API/channels. In the homies, rec and res. And to create a delete endpoint, we still use our rec object, but we don't pass it in on the body via a JSON. We pass it in via the URL, and that's right here. And so after this, the thing that lets the endpoint know that what's coming is a parameter that's passed in dynamically is we use a colon. And after that, you give it a name. We'll call it ID. So we're going to say when a person enters localhost 5000 /API/channels/ a very specific ID, one of these IDs, like then /API/channels/ that, then that means we want to delete this record. Or let's say we pass in this one, then we'll delete that record. So, so instead of pulling it off the rec.body, we're pulling it off the rec.params. And this is how we do that. Create a const, just kind of like we did with the rec.body, and we deconstruct that ID off of these params here, equals rec.params. And this is how we pull the value that's in here off of this rec.param object, and we stick it in this variable here called ID that's deconstructed. If we didn't deconstruct it, then we would have to refer to it elsewhere as rec.params.id. But it's just a little cleaner just to kind of deconstruct it right here. And now what we're going to do is, since we're not using a real true, living, database, we're using an array. We're going to do some array stuff here in order to strip that record off of the array. So normally when you want to delete something from an array, you need to know the index. Well, we don't know the index. We don't know the index. Let's say thousands and thousands of channels were added. Well, probably not thousands. I mean, a school probably doesn't have thousands. But let's say hundreds of channels are added. We don't know what index, but we do know the ID. So we're going to use the array find method. And what we're going to do is we're going to say overwrite lessons with itself minus the record of the ID that we don't want. And we're going to use the find method. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to get the record that we want to delete. First, we're going to see if it exists, because there's no use trying to delete it if it doesn't exist, right? So first we're going to say, let's create a variable, deleted, equals channels.find. We're going to look we're going to use this array method where we're going to look for a channel where the channel.id, because we know that's the name of the field, equals the ID, this ID here. Go in this array and find and return to me the channel where the channel ID in this array matches the ID that we're passing in on this rec.params, and stick it in this variable here. That lets us know if it's found or not. If it can't find it, there's no sense in carrying on with trying to do a delete operation because it isn't in the array. And we will have normally similar DB operations that will allow us to do before we try to delete a record from a SQLite or Postgres database. We can do a find on that record, and if it finds the record, now we can issue a delete. This is basically the same thing that we're doing. So now let's say if deleted, if it exists, that means, hey, the record we want to delete exists. So now we can do something, and then we can say else. If it doesn't exist, then we can return a response of a status 404 with a JSON message of channel you are looking for does not exist. Something, whatever, some sort of message that lets them know, hey, I can't find what you're trying to delete. But if deleted is truthy, what happens here is it's going to do this array method, and it's going to return either the channel that we want to delete, or it's going to return null. And if it's a channel we want to delete, this becomes a truthy statement, and if it returns a null, this becomes falsy. So if it's truthy, then we're going to say then let's say channels equals itself minus the channel that we want to remove. And for that we needed to make these lets. So if in your code base you have these as constants, change them to lets, because then that'll allow us to do this. It'll give you an error if it's a constant because we're trying to overwrite the array with itself. So I'm going to say less channels equals, so the channels array equals itself dot filter. I'm going to use the filter method to filter out the deleted one. Filter channel, and return where the channel.id is not equal to the ID. So return to us a brand new channels array minus the ID of the one that we passed in here. That's basically what we're doing here. Else, say, hey, I can't find it. And let's save this. Our server's running again. That looks good. Because we changed our code and saved it, these arrays got wiped out, so the channels that we've entered before are gone. So let's we're gonna have to re-enter them again. So let's do our posts again. Let's enter let's enter 2. Let's just enter 2. So beginning with a lesson ID of 1. Hit send. Now we have 1 record in there, and now let's do an intermediate with a lesson ID of 2. Let's do a get on those. Make sure that we get both of those back. We do, so now we know. And let's delete one of them. Let's delete the second one. So let's copy this ID. This is the ID of the one we want to delete. Normally, you would have a React or a Vue or something client where you would have an input form, and then the user on the client side would be able to, when you give them their nice big delete button, then it will automatically pull the ID off of the record that they want to delete. But right now, we have to specify it. So we're going to say delete. And now let's create a delete endpoint. Let me create one from scratch. Don't save. Let's create a brand new delete point from scratch here. It's going to be this localhost 5000 channels. And it's not a get, it's a delete. And the only other thing we got to do is put our URL parameter of that ID that we want to delete. So in our get, let's do the get again, make sure, boom, yep, there it is. So let's copy a record that we want to delete. We stick that ID as a URL parameter, and hit delete, and it's running, and it's running, and it's running, and it's not finding anything. So what's going on? Let's cancel it. Something's going on. So let's look back at this real quick. API channels ID rec.params deleted equals channels.find ID equals ID. If deleted, let's put a console log in here, huh? Let's just check. Let's just do a little online debugging here. So let's do console.log of deleted. Let's see if it makes it into this part of the loop, or it makes it into this part. Let's console.log deleted over here, and that'll let us know if it was able to find it here. Let's save. Because we changed our code, we're going to have to enter our posts again. So let's go and enter our posts. Let's just enter one. Let's just enter this one. Let's do a get on it. Make sure we get it back. Go, we have one. This is the record we want to delete. Control C. Let's go to our delete endpoint. Localhost API channels with, let's put that in there. And now when we hit send, we should get a console log back. So that's going to run, but let's go back to our code and see what console log. So it is able to find the one that we want to delete, so it is successfully going into here. So let's just look at, so it's got to be this, oh, we never returned a status. Aha, we found it here. Remember I said you always want to return a status. We return a status if it isn't successful. But I forgot to return a status here, so let's return a status. So res.status of 200.json with maybe the deleted object. There we go. Let's hit save. Go back to it. Because we hit save, we're going to have to do a brand new post, because if we do a get, it's going to be an empty array, right? So let's do a post of one record. Let's do another record. And now let's do a get. Make sure we get both of them. Let's delete the second one, or the first one, whatever. Control C. Let's go to our delete endpoint. Let's stick that ID up here. And now we should get down here, return to us the object that we want to delete. Boom, and there it is. And that is how you do a basic delete. Sorry for the mess up, but I think it was educational. I mean, you are going to make mistakes as you develop, and the best thing to do is you start throwing console logs at the places, and it kind of lets you know. We threw a console log right here, and it gave us information. If the console log would have been empty, then we would have known that it would have hopped down here, and then so it kind of helps us to zero in on where we need to focus and where we need to troubleshoot. So I will wipe out these console logs to clean up our code base, and that is your delete endpoint. So now your exercise before the next video is create a delete endpoint for the lessons.id and try to do that. And then when we go back to the next video, I will have the lessons code written down here for you, so you can check and see if you got it or not. I hope to see you back on the next video, and thank you very much.